Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of the Monsters Den. We've got in the co-captain's chair today, Mr. Dan Brown from the warehouse in Newburgh, New York. Greetings, my friend. How are you?
Greetings, happy holidays to you and all your audiences out there. It's good to be back. Still alive, still well.
That's right.
Still upright. And I'm glad you had invited me on for the Val Lewton, because when I say Val Lewton, I think Christmas. So that's good. It worked out.
Yeah, there you go. So Dan and I have been talking for a while about doing a show based on the films of Val Lewton, of course, who is a very notorious film producer and novelist and writer right around, in the 30s and 40s. And he produced about a dozen films, right, Dan? Just about 11, 12, something.
I think he did. He was involved during the 40s stretch, but let's say if we take Cat People and we cap it with Isle of the Dead, I believe it was the last one. There are 11 films in there, but only 9 are horror or horror themed.
Horror themed.
He did a couple of other things.
Yeah.
And the non-horror themed ones are kind of interesting. Especially one called Youth Run Wild, which is a juvenile delinquent film. But it's in Val Lewton, very it's an interesting approach. And how he got stuck with these films, I don't know. But there's a lot I've uncovered over a long period of time. How he kind of lost control at one point, this whole thing, because of the budgets, because of this and that. So.
Yeah, definitely low budget films, and I think we're talking about the same time period. Most of these films were done from like 1942 to 46 was, I think, Isle of the Dead 45, Bedlam 46. So we're not looking at a bunch of years here. And this is also the same time period where Universal was going through their second wave of horror films like The Wolfman and Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman and all the ones that came after that. So, but half the budget, right, for these films, and these were all on RKO. And in saying that, these films are very different from the Universal horror films. These are much more with the horror element toned down. In some instances, you might even argue that some of these are not horror films at all, but very well made with what they had to work with, very well acted. He worked with just a couple directors that directed a good chunk of these films, as we'll probably get into as we talk about them. Very atmospheric and very, very fun to watch, as long as your expectations are not, we're going to get Frankenstein and Dracula and the Wolfman type of thing, right? I mean, this is a different type of a horror film.
Yeah, so it was more of a psychological horror. He didn't, he was approached to come. He worked for 8 years for David O. Selznick.
Yep.
In some production capacity, and he didn't really like it there. He crossed paths with Hitchcock, and then he went. And actually, Orson Welles' failure with Citizen Kane and the Magnificent Ambersons was what opened the door for Val Lewton. And he was hired at RKO on a miscommunication. Apparently, as you said earlier, he was a writer, and he wrote short stories. He even wrote a story called The Bagirta, which was about like a cat woman type of horror short story. But anyhow, at some business party, after Wells literally almost sank Universal RKO into bankruptcy, Turner, who was running the studio at that time, overheard somebody saying, "Oh, there's Val Lewton. He writes horrible stories, like not good stories." And Kerner misinterpreted it as horror stories. And he says, "Oh, God." So he just drags him in, and Val Lewton had never produced a film before. But he was under the guidance of David O. Selznick, which was one of the more rabid, more passionate producers of all time. So that's how he got stuck there doing this. And he pulled it off quite well.
Yeah. And died very young. I mean, 46 years old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he didn't live too much longer after he produced a lot of these films, unfortunately. But so we're doing a top 5 of the Val Lewton films. And I'll have Dan kick us off with his number 5 pick for today.
Well, number 5, if you recall, I think a couple of months ago, or who knows, I've lost time since COVID. That could be 2 years ago. We had a show about non-universal horrors. I think we did.
Yep.
And one of the films, my number 5, is something that I had on that list. It's always had an interesting perspective on, and that is The Seventh Victim. And The Seventh Victim is a modern day, it's a modern day witchcraft story along the lines, or devil worshiping along the lines of Rosemary's Baby, or that in a topical theme. What intrigues me about this film is it started originally as a mystery, and it plays out like a mystery. And it was supposedly about a serial killer chasing a woman through Los Angeles. And it all of a sudden it got switched. Talk about apples to oranges or oranges to apples. It got switched to Greenwich Village and a devil worshiping cult. And it was hard. It received it very indifferently when it came out. Cinematography is great. I actually like to attribute this to being one of the early examples of film noir, considering it's supposedly originally a mystery. Kim Hunter's first role. It's just got this eerie thing. There's somebody at RKO that was really intrigued with Greenwich Village because a number of films made at RKO appear in Greenwich Village. So there was something, I guess Greenwich Village had this mystique, like a bohemian lifestyle, as did Chinatown in the 20s when they were doing pulp novels. But nonetheless, The Seventh Victim, great little film. It's about a woman chasing after her sister who has vanished, who had been working in a big perfume factory. There's a lot of hints. It's been notorious because a lot of hints of lesbianism in the film. They have no qualms about saying that. It also addresses suicide, not to give anything away. And you can't show suicide. That was a taboo thing at that time in film. You could not show a suicide. So it's, it had all these elements. It also had, interestingly enough, the character played by Tom Conway, who was played the Falcon in a detective series. Now he was also he was Dr. Lewis Judd in The Cat People. He is also the same character in The Seventh Victim. And why they did this, we don't know. I think they did do some kind of a remote tie-in because that was notorious with studios, and RKO was the worst for that, and I'll explain that later. But it's not really involved. But it's interesting. It's eerie as hell. Great cinematography, and it really is a noir film. And I think it's directed by what was it? Mark Robeson.
Who did?
Who was, and that, and then also the cinematography. I believe, I'm not sure, the cinematography may have been Nicholas Murasaku, and I'll explain a little bit about him later, as far as him and
Nicholas Murasaku. You are correct. Yep.
Great little film. I can't go rambling on more about it. Check it out. Be kind to it. It's one of these films in his canon that has grown stronger over the years.
Yeah, good stuff. My number 5 from 1945, his second to last film, Isle of the Dead. Also starring, yes, Mr. Boris Karloff, who did work with Val on a couple of films, this being the final one. Actually, no, the final one was Bedlam, right? Yes, Bedlam was, so he worked, actually, Lewton's 3 last films all had Karloff in it, as I'm looking at the list here. Body Snatcher, Isle of the Dead, and Bedlam, all within a very short span of each other. This one also produced by Mark Robeson, who did again, Lewton worked with just a couple of directors who worked on pretty much the entire filmography that he had set up with RKO. Cinematography, Jack McKenzie on this. So this basically takes place during the Balkan Wars, 1912. So this is more of a period piece. Basically, Karloff plays a military general who goes with a crew to an island where they're burying all of the dead as a result of the war. And they kind of get trapped on this island. They discovered there is a plague on the island, and then everything kind of descends into madness from there. And it's really interesting because I think in the beginning of the film, Karloff's character is, a fine, decent human being, but when faced with all the elements that they have going on the island, as anybody would, the descent into madness begins. And I think it's just a really cool, chilling film, but it's a slow burn. This is not an all action film. It's funny because there's a woman played by Ellen Drew, whose character they name a Vorvulaka, which sort of, you might say, is somewhat vampirish. And so Karloff and a lot of the other characters believe that she is the one who's causing all these deaths, when in actuality, it really is a plague. So it's really an interesting film, and another really good performance by Karloff, who's always great. I mean, he's just, that's that's the nature of Boris Karloff, right? He's just quality no matter what film he's in. And I like this film. It's worth repeated viewings because, like I said, it is a slow burn, but really eerie. The sets are really cool because, again, it's supposed to be on a remote island, and the cinematography is very well done. But one thing I do want to mention, and I think is true for all of these films, or most of them anyway, there is an atmosphere that all Val Lewton pictures have that I think is really trademark to his film. And no matter which one you watch, you're like, yeah, that's got to be a Val Lewton picture. And it's absolutely true for this one as well. And I love the original poster. It says, "We'll keep you screaming. The Isle of the Dead will keep you screaming." So whether in today's world it will make you scream enough, I don't know, but it's well worth seeing. And that is my number 5.
A film full of dread. That's what it is. Just dread.
Well, it's not
opening
whatsoever. Yeah.
No. And apparently, like according to interviews, Karloff loved having the opportunity to work with Lewton because he was tired of, he went to Universal. He had played in the House of Frankenstein, was it?
Yep.
And he played the Mad Doctor, and he did not want to be part of these monster rallies. He was an actor, and he wanted to expand. And Val Lewton allowed him to exercise his acting chops on the 3 films he worked on in totally different styles.
Yep.
So it works out well.
Yeah, and all of his characters in all 3 films are very different, which is kind of cool. So, all right, back to you, number 4.
Number 4, I'm going to go with Curse of the Cat People. Val Lewton is one of these people that I learned to appreciate as I get older. Thank you. I'm glad I'll tell you have all the Blu-rays. Of course, you could show us these things. I'm getting pulled out my Betamax.
Got to show off the props here, Dan. Got to do it.
That's it. I wear my prop. It's my beret. That's it. But now getting back to it, Curse the Cat People, I kind of get a kick out of it because it actually takes place in the town I was born in, Terrytown, New York, and they have qualms about saying that. It's also associated with the Headless Horseman, which I found out that Val Lewton, of course, lived in New Rochelle. He lived in the local area around in Westchester growing up. And he, in turn, was also a big fan of horror stories. And in fact, the Headless Horseman. I'm sorry, the Headless Horseman, the Curse of the Cat People, with the Headless Horseman being mentioned into it. This is a film that goes all over the place. I remember seeing it years ago. It's about our character from the film, played by Kent Smith, who is the father, has his daughter, which I believe, no, it's not, his wife died, who was from the Cat People. Simone Signoret, who played the actress who played it. She dies, and he's remarried, he has a daughter, and it's like a childhood fantasy fairy tale. How children perceive things, and imaginary friends, being an only child and wondering where her mother was. And, in actuality, it really has little to no association with cat people. And I can imagine the audience is that point that, I say, oh man, Curse the Cat People, or the Cat People, which was so successful on a horror level. You got the same people watching these Universal monster rallies showing up and all of a sudden going, what's going on here? There's like an old lady with her daughter locked upstairs, and she's talking to an imaginary friend who I think is the woman who was in the Cat People. When's the action going to start? But it evolves so beautifully over the whole thing because it's everything through the child's eyes. Anything from the fear of the Headless Horseman and the story and having nightmares and where was her mother and so forth. And the alienation, it was a much deeper film. And you learn this as you go on over the years, that it's more about a child's psychology in the world they grew up in and how they view it. And, how sometimes adults just kind of go like, yeah, okay, great. Go play with your toys, but you don't realize they're little minds of their own. I love it because of that. And of course, it's got Sir Lancelot, the Calypso singer, who was also in I Walked with a Zombie and Ghost Ship, who brought actually Calypso music to America and was an influence on Harry Belafonte. So, Curse the Cat People.
I was going to talk about it a little more because it's coming up in my list, but since we're talking about it now, I really like Curse the Cat People a lot. And you have to wonder now, looking back on it, was it the right decision to call it Curse of the Cat People, meaning a sequel to the Cat People, and to have characters from that film who are basically reprising their roles, but sort of, but not, right? Because it's like you have the husband like you said, who now, this is years later, he's remarried. They have like a 5, 6, 7-year-old child,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, the ghost of his now dead wife, Irena, who
Right.
Simone Simon, who's amazing, and that's just, it's basically her ghost now comes and starts talking to the child. But the whole gist of the story is centers on the child and this whole feeling of, you know, a kid who has parents who are really busy and don't really have a lot of time for her, and the loneliness that a child can feel. And you hear about this all the time now. I mean, it's amazing how timely something like this story is in today's day and age, where you have parents who work, have careers, and the children are home all by
Mhm.
themselves or with other people. And, you know, the child's imagination and all that sort of thing. I think it's a really, really well done film. It's not a horror film, though, not even close,
It's
but
a fairy tale.
it's a fairy tale. It's a childhood fairy tale film, but a loose sequel to that original Cat People, really in name only and in some of the characters, but it's almost like they're not really reprising their roles at all, because the whole Cat People thing, which we'll get to when we talk about the first film, has nothing to do with this, but it's still
Well,
so
the
atmospheric.
father is the father, though. The father is the same. Ken
Yeah.
Smith, who plays, you know, the father, he is the same character, but that's the only association with it, you know. And you have what's her name appearing as the imaginary friend. But
Yeah.
yeah, that whole thing about Cat People, it was there because that's somebody that's, we've got to tie it into the Cat People. That's how they tied stuff in.
Yeah.
You know, it had to be something, some buzz line. But I can see people being kind of a little bit thrown off by that film.
Well, yeah, I mean, that Cat People was very successful, and I think they wanted to play off on that success. And then when people went to see this, they were expecting the sequel. Like, what is this? This has nothing to do with the first, right? But if you kind of take that out of your minds, that expectation, because I actually, when I originally saw these two films, talking about Cat People and Return of the Cat People, or Curse of the Cat People, I was very disappointed in the sequel. I have rewatched it a couple times very recently, and now I can really enjoy it for what it is. And I think it's a really lovely little film. It's not a horror film. It's just an atmosphere, kind of like melodrama, and it's really good and has a really good message. And the acting is superb. So I think if you can kind of like just quench your, you know, just stabilize that expectation that it's a sequel to a really great atmospheric horror film, and just kind of take it for what it is. It's a lot of fun, and it's a really good little film. So and I'm actually happy it made both of our lists. We'll get to mine in a minute, but yeah. So and that's my additional kind of diatribe on Curse of the Cat People. But it's not my number 4 actually. My number 4 is The Leopard Man with Dennis O'Keefe and Margot, who only has, you know, single name, right? The Leopard Man was from 1943. Curse of the Cat People. I mean, yeah, Curse of the Cat People was from 1944. So again, we're talking about only a couple of years here where these movies are just coming out, boom, boom, boom. This is really interesting because this is like one of the first ever serial killer films. When you really think about it, I mean, other than maybe The Lodger, right?
Yeah, but that was based on Jack the Ripper. You know,
Yeah,
that's
right. But I mean, other than these films, I mean, really, there were not a lot of movies being made about serial killers. Another kind of taboo thing back in the day. And they actually don't even state in the film that it might be a serial killer. It's not something that was said back then. Basically, the gist of this story is you get a circus leopard uh, winds up getting a loan to this guy who's the main character in the film, and that is Dennis O'Keefe, from a guy he knows who runs a circus, right? So his girlfriend at the time is like a cabaret. She sings in like a nightclub, and he wanted to help her spice up her act. So he borrows this very tame leopard to bring to the nightclub to add a little spice. Anyway, long story short, the leopard winds up escaping. Okay. And then someone gets killed. A young girl gets killed. They blame it on the leopard because the leopard's on the loose. And then all of a sudden, boom, 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 all these other murders are happening right in that town. So of course, everybody is assuming that the leopard is going around killing people. Meanwhile, the original owner of the leopard, who owns the circus, is like, she's tame. She's not a killer. It's like, she's just scared. We have to go find her and bring her home. They eventually do find the leopard who has been killed, but then the murders keep happening. Right. So now it's this whole like who done it, who's the killer type of thing, you know, and really good film. And it even better like the second and third time around. And I think it's just a great little murder mystery. disguised as a serial killer film. And again, if you can kind of think about how many serial killer films we've seen over the years, to go back to, kind of the early days when they were doing stuff like this. So it's a really cool little chilling horror film, directed by Jacques Tourneur, however he says his name, who also worked on a number of films for Val Lewton in this series. I think we're going to cover all of them. There's Mark Robeson, Robert Wise, and this guy, and that's basically who he worked with for the most part. So yes, that's my number 4. It's a good little film, The Leopard Man. Again, the title's a little misleading, right? There is a leopard in the film, but doesn't really have that much to do with it, other than in the beginning. But pretty cool movie, pretty cool film.
It's funny, is Val Lewton. I don't know if he liked to push the envelope, because you're mentioning about like this film being a serial killer film. I mean, The Seventh Victim, which I mentioned earlier, was the first film to deal with devil worship in the topical sense, in the modern day sense. I mean, discounting Night of the Demon, Curse of the Demon, but like a Rosemary's Baby type of thing. When we think witchcraft, we usually think, Vincent Price running around a horse with a very long wig and a hat. When you think witchcraft, or somewhere Klaus Kinski or Herbert Lom, or like this. Yep. But that number 2, we were talking about the leopard people. Yes, it's about a serial killer, about a murderer. Now, things had been done before, but not to this extent. And then also getting into the Curse the Cat people, they had never really addressed the psychological issues. And I think that was deep down inside, is the world as they view it through a child. These are all firsts on how things are done in film, on top of the cinematography. So Leopard Man did not make my list, I'll be quite honest with you, but it is my own collection. So, but it's a good film. And Dennis O'Keefe, anybody's familiar with the genre of things on The Monster's Den, he plays like Kay Kaiser's manager in a 1940 film called You'll Find Out, which also includes Peter Lorre, Boris Karloff, and Bela Lugosi. And he plays that. And then he went into the late 40s, and he ended up playing in one of the most hard-boiled noir films ever made, about a convict getting released from prison and wants revenge, called Raw Deal. So if you want to see Dennis O'Keefe in a variety of different phases, it's amazing. But good film. Thanks.
Cool. All right. You're number 3.
Oh, I'm up. God, I was just rambling along there. Well, this is where I'm going to go with The Cat People. Number fits right in the middle of the top 5, if you want to call it that. Yep. I'm not going to take too much thunder with this, because Peter owns the Criterion, and he's probably going to want to go on a nice little rant about it. So I love the film, atmospherically filmed. Once again, it's the horror in the shadows. It's our imagination, our mind. You walk in an old house, the lights are out, you think you see somebody off to the side in the shadows, but it's not there. It's our imagination. And this is a key, true element. Now, this deals, oddly enough, and it was brought up much, much more prevalent in the 1982 remake. Honestly, it's sexually attached to her whenever she becomes aroused. This could possibly be the thing that triggers the animal. Once again, a first. But I'm going to let you talk about more about it. But Cat People, definitely on top. Yeah, please.
Cool. All right, my number 3, real quick, because we already talked about it, Curse of the Cat People. I think we've kind of said it all. Great film. There's the little girl right there, and the older woman who lives down the street that Dan was talking about. Yeah, great film. Again, just dispel that it's a horror film, because it is not, but it's quite good. Back to you for number 2.
Number 2, I have Body Snatcher, which once again, I think that this is, I had mentioned the Body Snatcher in another show we had, and it's actually been replaced by something else in my favorite Val Lewton films, especially after revisiting them again. But the Body Snatcher is well named. It's the last team up of Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi. It is based roughly on the Burke and Hare murders. It was another body snatching story. It was based on a true story. Karloff is wonderful in this film. He plays a guy who's really repulsive. He does not care about human life, but all of a sudden he's the one trying to pay for an operation for a crippled child. So he's got this sentimental heart. But then when him and Bela Lugosi get it together, which is their swan song, they kind of chew up the scenery. Maybe not as intensely as in Heat in the diner, but they do chew up the scenery, and it's a great ending coda to their team ups over the years. Well done, atmospheric. The ending of the film, assuming most people have seen it, where Carlos' body is thrashing about in a in a carriage, falling all over the doctor, who's, once again, it's your mind.
Yeah.
You know, it's nothing more than that. And well done. And this was directed, I think, what was it? This was directed by Robert Wise, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Yes. And this, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Robert Wise, was this his? No, Curse the Cappy was his first directorial job. No, this was one of his major films after he broke into directing with him. But yes, The Body Snatcher, good film. Number 2.
Cool. 1945. More about that in a minute. Not to be so giving it all away, but you know, my number 2 is Cat People from 1942. This was the first film that Val Lewton produced and directed by Jacques Tourneur, I guess. This is the Criterion Collection Blu-ray. I will say, give a little plug for the folks at Criterion. They do a pretty amazing job on all of their Blu-rays, and the film looks spectacular. You know, Dan gave a really good presentation of, you know, what this film is about. A couple points I want to hit home. First of all, the lead actress who plays Irena is Simone Simon, who was a French actress. She just lights up the screen. I mean, she, if you get the Criterion Collection, they have a whole documentary about her and her career, and how, like, you know, she was like this talked about actress at the time of this, but her career never really took off after that. There's a lot of other films, but all sorts of weird circumstances. Apparently she was very hard to work with on the set, and she never became the big star she probably should have, but she's absolutely gorgeous and captivating. She's got that little accent, which is just great. And she just owns this role as this very strange woman who, you know, meets this man and they fall in love, but there's this weird dark secret about her. And, you know, they have the zoo living nearby, and she seems to have this connection with the great cats in the zoo. And every time, like Dan mentioned, that she's in some sort of a state of sexual arousement, you start to see the shadows of the cat, and someone winds up dying, and it's like, so does she turn into like a werecat or a cat creature? That's what they imply. You don't actually see that, though, and that's the great thing about this film, is everything is implied, but there's this sense of menace and dread throughout this wonderfully atmospheric fantasy tinged tale. And there's one scene in particular that I always kind of go back to, and Dan knows which scene I'm talking about, the scene around the pool, right? An indoor pool where, you know, she's following this other woman who's in her man's life, and the woman becomes terrified. She thinks she's being followed. It's all about shadows, and it's so good, and it's so creepy, and the use of sound effects. You think, you know, are we seeing what we're going to see? What happens here? So good. Again, is it a horror film? I guess it is, but it's a really creepy kind of melodrama too. And there's just so much atmosphere in this film. This to me, if I can kind of put it in perspective with something else from another studio. So one of the things I love about Universal's The Wolfman, the first film, is I love the acting. I love the actors and the character and all that sort of thing. But that movie is so dripping with atmosphere that it's just a joy to watch. This is along the same lines, very similar type of a feel to this film, which I really like a lot. And it's just amazing that, you know, this was the first and arguably probably the most artsy of all the films that Val Lewton did. I don't think they ever really, there may be better movies overall, obviously, because we both have ones ranked over it on the list, but I think that this is probably the most spectacular to watch from a production standpoint. I think it's just a beautiful film. I think it works as a horror film, but it's also, like I said, it's a very just creepy atmospheric melodrama, and she's absolutely incredible. If you watch it for nothing else than to see Simone in this movie, you're not going to be disappointed. So,
you know, it was the first film that Val Lewton produced at RKO. Yep. The Cat People, and it also, when you think about it, this film has more mental illness going on in it than Bedlam.
Yeah,
because she is either schizophrenic, she could be bipolar. We don't even know. But because of her obsession, the stalking thing about, you know, Ken Smith with his new girlfriend, and so forth and so on. As a matter of fact, just jumping back, I believe, to the 7th victim, as Dr. Judd's talking about Tom Conway's character, who's also in the cat people. He mentions doesn't work with the timeline. He mentions, yeah, once he treated a woman out of New York, some crazy European woman with like split person, something along those lines. That's the only other connection things have with these things, but it didn't match up. But wonderful film. It's a film that when I was growing up as a kid, when you're expecting to watch like The Wolfman or The Mummy or some monster crashing through the door, I enjoyed these films for the atmosphere. But it was kind of like strange because where are the monsters? And that's what it is. Where are they're in the shadows. Seventh victim, guy walks down a hallway, comes back dead. What happened?
What happened to him?
And the noises, and that's what Cat People hits all the cylinders and took everybody at RKO by surprise. But I don't think the general movie-going public was really ready for all this. He was way ahead of his time.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, and we talked about all of these kind of taboo subjects, right, that he tackles in these movies, even if they're kind of vague. These are not just mindless, guy gets created into a monster and rampages around town, or a vampire shows up and starts sucking the blood of people. These are definitely deeper films that are tackling subject areas that you really wouldn't go there in the 1940s. And I think you're right, these were way ahead of their time, and they're definitely more like the thinking man's movie, I think.
The monster rallies were made for the Saturday afternoon matinee for the kids.
Right.
These are something that possibly, who knows, a teenager going through puberty or going through whatever, any number of things can sit and watch, but there's a message in it across the board, because you could actually show Curse the Cat People to children. It's really not scary. It's scary, but scary in a childlike sense.
Yeah.
It's not like it's, a Hatchet 6 or something. Come on, kids, we're going to watch a Hatchet marathon. This will quiet you down, But anyhow, that's it. Yeah, good choice, man.
All right, number one.
Number one. Is that me, huh? Okay, number one. All I could say is number one is a film that I've always liked, mostly atmospherically. It's a classic example, as we're talking about. We'll have to put the character. Let's call this Curse the Cat People because it'll tie it into the first movie and this and that. This even goes further, and this goes more into the modus operandi of RKO, and that is I Walked with a Zombie. And the title of that film, RKO is the most notorious of going to their writers, having no idea, and say, cheese harvesters of Mars, and they have to write a script. But this is how I Walked with a Zombie. But it wasn't that outrageous. It was based, they literally lifted the title from an article about somebody visiting the Caribbean and possibly experiencing zombies, whatever, in whatever sense of the word. And they call it I Walked with a Zombie. This film is just creepy. It is scary. It's about a doctor who's come. There's the wife of a landowner in the Caribbean. She has been in a catatonic state for a number of years. They believe that she is a zombie, and they bring a doctor to treat her, but she just seems to be in this zombielistic type of sleepwalking pattern all the time. And it works very well with the wind and the dress flowing in the breeze and the palm trees and all that stuff. And it's very atmospheric. And then, of course, it's got the most underappreciated zombie in zombie history, and that's Darby Jones, who is the zombie who is standing there that greets them on their way to go to a ceremony. At some point, the nurse brings her to a ceremony, and the first shot of him with a flashlight looking up to him, they must have had him on another box or something, because he appears to be 8 feet tall, and he's got these bulbous, like ping pong ball eyes that pop out, and wow. And then he also has a pivotal part in the end. But once again, it is dealing with possibly underlyingly depression and potential of suicide from depression. And I think that's what Val Lewton tried to address. He gave the movie going public a bit more credit. It never was my favorite one, but I've watched it. Now, not a spoiler warning, a spoiler alert. If you do any research on this film, they actually remade this movie. Now, back in the 90s, when Tales from the Crypt was pumping hard with 6 or 7 seasons of TV shows, they were responsible for putting out a couple of different horror movies. One was called Bordello of Blood. One was called Demon Night with Billy Zane. I think Bordello of Blood had, what's his name? Stand-up comedian who hardly does any work anymore. God, who was he? somebody from Saturday Night Live. Dennis, oh God, it'll come to me.
Yeah.
But anyhow, they made these films that didn't fare well. And all of a sudden, as I was doing some research on I Walked with a Zombie, I find out that it appeared under the moniker of Tales from the Crypt Presents Ritual. And I'm going, what is this? So I start looking around and I find it somewhere and I watch it. Now, number one, you got Craig Sheffer in there, who was in Nightbreed, lead actor Nightbreed. You have Jennifer Grey, who is Joel Grey's daughter, who was also in Dirty Dancing.
Yep.
And you've got the only redeeming factor in the film, and he's not in all enough, is Tim Curry playing what else? Tim Curry as whatever he's doing. But there's always some entertaining. But the film lacks total soul, total horror, everything. And there's more connection to see, okay, this is a remake of, I Walked with a Zombie than saying Curse the Cat People is connected to cat people. But it's pretty bad. So if you find it out there, I'm warning you. Don't get too excited about it.
And that never got officially released, did it?
I don't know. It was. I found it on DVD. I think it showed up on cable. I believe. I don't think it went to the movie theaters. May have shown up cable, but it's got Tales from the Crypt Presents, and even the introduction by the Crypt Keeper. It looks like something out of a bad Puppetoon movie. And I think what happened is, I think very much like what Shudder does nowadays. I think Tales of the Crypt. There was this film that was finished. It was a remake of whatever they call it, Ritual, and I guess they just bought it and slapped their name on it. Not that, don't get me wrong, not that Bordello of Blood and Demon Knight are, epic films.
But they're not bad. I mean, those two aren't bad.
No, they're entertaining. Oh yeah. But it's but overall, but I Walked with a Zombie atmospherically. Once again, we've got what you call it, Sir Lancelot singing Trinidadian songs, and and if you want to see the unofficial sequel to I Walked with a Zombie, then you have to watch Zombies on Broadway, because Sir Lancelot is in that, and so is Darby Jones.
Yep.
Of course, Brown and Carney and Bela Lugosi. So it's a worthwhile run. But anyhow, I Walk with a Zombie, just great film. Like I said, the atmospherics, the filming, the storyline, and Tom Conway, who was from The Falcon, playing a drunken Englishman. And we did that well. And in real life, too.
Yeah, I mean, there's also some other stuff going on. I mean, they touch on, slavery and voodoo and experimental medicine, right? Which we hear about all the time now. So, all right. So Tales from the Crypt Presents Ritual, a 2002 American horror comedy film and third and the final film based on the HBO series. Direct to DVD.
That explains it. There you go.
Yep.
Yeah.
It is based on the film I Walked with a Zombie.
I know, but it's not.
Yeah, I've never seen it. I don't even know if that's ever been released on Blu-ray, because I know I have both Bordello of Blood and the other one. But
I have it on DVD only because I bought it because I was so damn curious. I got it for like $1.99 with free shipping somewhere. So I said, and I'm still questioning that purchase, but no.
I don't mind Demon Knight and Bordello of Blood, to be honest with you. I mean,
I like Bordello of Blood.
They both have their moments. They're both fun. I mean,
what was it? The actor Dennis? He played on Saturday Night Live Weekend Update.
Which one? Bordello of Blood? Oh, hold on. Dennis Miller.
Dennis Miller, thank you. And he plays kind of like this sarcastic. Actually, it's not a bad film. We could probably donate a whole film on a whole show on Bordello of Blood.
I'm telling you, because I mean, look
at Corey. Not Corey Haim. Corey Feldman. Is it Corey
Feldman in this? Corey Feldman, Chris Brandon, Andy Everhart, Eric Eleniak, Dennis Miller. I mean, I've forgotten how much star power were in these Tales from the Crypt films.
No, this was high. These were high-powered train wrecks.
Yeah. Anyhow, all right. So your number one, I Walk with a Zombie. That is actually my honorable mention. My number one, however, from 1945, is The Body Snatcher, based on a Robert Louis Stevenson story about grave robbing, and eventually a little more than grave robbing. We're now going to murder people, right, to get the cadavers. Like you mentioned, an amazing Karloff performance in this, and he plays a very complex character, actually, because you're right, he does have a few sides to him. which you see throughout the film. In the end, though, he's a pretty psychotic, just, not a very good guy, despite the fact that he does show a little bit of emotion and heart throughout the film. And he's got this really weird relationship with the doctor, who's Dr. Toddy McFarlane. He calls him Toddy throughout the film, right? It's not his real name. I think his name is Wolf McFarlane, but he calls him Toddy because they have a history together. So apparently they were doing stuff together years before, and Carlos' character actually went to prison to hide something that the doctor did, but the doctor has chosen to kind of forget about it. It's like, let's let bygones be bygones. But now that Karloff is out of prison, and now he starts working with the doctor again. The doctor needs cadavers, so he goes to the cemeteries, to the graves, to dig them up for him, pays him cash, so on and so forth. And in fact, I think at one point doesn't Karloff mention the two notorious grave robbers quickly?
Burke and Hare. Yeah.
He does name drop them in this film, which I thought was pretty cool to kind of throw that in there. And so Bela Lugosi is also in this film in a much smaller role. And like Dan mentioned, this would be the last time these two would appear in a film together, and they had done a whole bunch of films together prior. But Bela's got a very small role. He plays kind of like the butler, not really the butler, but like the assistant to the doctor.
He cleans up the laboratory. He's like,
he doesn't have a lot of
handyman.
Yeah, he's just kind of like, he's got like this weird, straight, long haircut, and he doesn't really say much until they have the one scene together. And basically, without giving too much away, is he basically finds out that Karloff's character has been murdering people to give the cadavers to the doctor. So he's basically like, I'm going to go tell the police unless you give me money. And so Karloff is like, okay, you're a pretty smart guy there. I forget what the name of the character is, Lugosi's character is. And he's like, we can work something out. We can work something out. But that, of course, that doesn't turn up well. But it's just, I think what is a little sad about this is that this is 1945 we're talking about. So to see like where both of these legendary actors were at this point in time, you got Karloff, which has the real meaty starring role, and Lugosi kind of thrown in there in just this little throwaway performance because they wanted more star power, right? Because Lewton wasn't an idiot. He wanted to get people to go to the theaters to see these films. And if you got both Karloff and Lugosi on the billboard, that's big business, right? Even though at this point in time, Lugosi is not really appearing in any, really major roles anymore. And this was in between doing some stuff with Universal, but a great film. I think the acting is excellent throughout the whole movie. Again, there's a lot of really moments of dread and just like maliciousness because, Karloff in this film, this is one of his great roles. And like Dan mentioned, he, I think, really appreciated doing these films with Lewton because he wasn't playing monsters anymore. Although you could arguably say that his character here is pretty damn monstrous in his just real sadistic intent, right? He's just playing a really, really bad dude or someone who is capable of doing really bad things. And, the whole like last 20 minutes of the film is great. There's this big confrontation between the doctor and him. And then the final scene that Dan mentioned before, it's in the carriage, really, really good. And just a classic tale. Yeah.
Well handled. It's funny how you mentioned with Karloff coming to the studio, it's so funny. Prior to the three Karloff films, this is when, what's his name? Val Lewton started to stumble and fall a bit. Starters was in 1943. They had put together a film called Ghost Ship.
Yeah.
Ghost Ship was made, released. It starred at that time a person in the twilight of his career, but was also known as a character called the Whistler by the name of Richard Dix. He was a popular silent and early 30s actor, and he played the captain. This film came out, and all of a sudden a legal lawsuit came to RKO about two writers that had submitted a script for a film similar to this. The courts ruled in their favor. They found about 18 similarities in the script. So not only did they allow $19,000 to be paid to these two writers, they had to immediately pull it from syndication, withdraw it from the theaters. So after its initial showing of maybe a couple of weeks, it vanished. In fact, the lawsuit was so strong that they could not even release it to a syndication package for television. So it wasn't until 1995, I believe, that when the film slipped into public domain, because it is a public domain film, if I'm not mistaken. It might be known by RKO now with the restoration, whatever they did, but it was, they were able to show it. So it was not seen for 50 years. Now, that was a big blow, considering also the fact $20,000 in a lawsuit at that time. To put it in perspective on what was going on, the average budget for an RKO film was 135,000, 125 to 135,000 for film, which fell far below Warner Universal. But to give you an indication, Devilback from Monogram was done for $97,000. So you're talking about Val Lewton created some amazing stuff. So he had that failure. Curse the Cat People did not do well either. And this guy, that's why Osteen found himself doing 2 other films, and they brought Karloff in. And the only reason I think Val Lewton survived at this point is because Kerner, or the studio, approached Karloff to come in and do films, because they figured he wanted nothing more to do with Universal. And they kind of sort of knew that possibly they could be, even though they're B productions, he could be in films that had some meat and potatoes he could chew on. And that's how he went there. And that's what salvaged everything. But soon after this, everything went away.
Yeah.
For Val Lewton. It's a shame. I mean, but his 9 films stand up to sometimes people's 40 film careers. Whatever.
Well, I mean, that's the whole thing. I mean, it's, you're not looking at a big list here, but it's pretty good quality all throughout.
There's really not a bad Val Lewton film. It really is.
I mean, even a movie. I mean, yeah, it's like Bedlam. Yeah. Even though that's more of like a period piece, that's still a pretty fun film and another good performance.
Come on, the scene when when the person walks into the hallway and all the arms shoot out from the behind the cages. Yep. That's so like Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
And the thing that makes Val Lewton so wonderful about all of this is that the influence he had, not only by himself, but also his creative circle at the time. Jacques Tourneur did the first 3 films with him, okay, of which Mark Robeson was the editor. Now, Jacques Tourneur went off eventually and did Night of the Demon, or Curse of the Demon, in 1957. And Jacques Tourneur's idea was that he did not want the demon to be seen. That was added by Columbia Pictures because they needed to show a monster on the screen. And that's why you've got this very endearing photo of a demon, which graced the cover of a famous Monsters of Filmland thing. And yep, big puppy arms, right? And then, but he didn't want that there. He wanted it to be, the scary part was like the wind and whatever's going on, but he was overruled.
Yeah.
But that was his influence from that. But Jacques Tourneur's influence even goes any further. He hooked up with Nicholas Urasaka, who was the cinematographer on these earlier films, a number of these Val Lewtons, and they created one of the seminal noir films entitled Out of the Past, which also launched the career to the A-list for people like Kirk Douglas and was it Burt Lancaster? Was it Kirk Douglas? Yes. Was it? Oh, Robert Mitchum. My apologies. Robert Mitchum. And their career was off and running. Robert Wise, who started as an editor, working on editing, he was handed the reins of Curse the Cat People because the original director was falling radically behind schedule. So Lewton put him in the director's seat. He did Curse the Cat People, and he eventually went off to do The Body Snatcher. Correct, Robert Wise. Yeah. But Robert Wise's career goes even further. He went out and did The Sand Pebbles. He did West Side Story, the original version. And he also did a film which is totally influenced by Val Lewton. He said that in interviews, The Haunting.
Oh, yeah.
In which you don't see the ghosts. It's all in the shadows in your mind.
All implied.
And even Mark Robeson, the last one, who was probably like the runt of the litter in some respects, when Wells was doing Citizen Kane at the studio, Mark Robeson was an uncredited assistant editor on both Citizen Kane and on Magnificent Amberson. So he was part of that creative team of Kane. Kerner, when he took the studio open, he hated Wells so much for almost burying the studio that he held a grudge by guilt by association with Mark Robeson and did not want him to direct. So the first 3 films he edited, he eventually became an editor on his right because Val Lewton promoted him to be a director. And then after that, he went off to do things such as Peyton Place, Valley of the Dolls, right up and including, what was it, Robert Shaw and Lee Marvin, Avalanche Express, which was like an action film in '79, but they both had prolific careers. But these are people that came out of that Val Lewton School for Thought.
Yeah.
So his exposure, I mean, his inspiration to people, or his influence on the world of cinema over 9 movies, is pretty spectacular.
Yeah.
That was my closing thoughts on those guys. I had to
Agree.
bring
Yeah.
that jazz in.
Good points. Yeah. So, and I will say, and kind of pointing out once again, that if you are a Karloff fan, but really, you know the Frankenstein roles and the Mummy, and a handful of others, definitely check this out. You'll never be rid of me, Toddy. You'll never be rid of me, right?
From Toddy.
Yeah, so definitely good stuff. But these are excellent films that I think they're more slow burn type films and more atmospheric, but no less impactful on this whole idea of horror films from the 1940s. And I think really, really important. So hope you all enjoyed watching this here. This was as much fun to do as to talk about as it is to watch them, I think, right? Because Dan and I have been rewatching these in recent weeks, getting ready for this. And
getting cross-eyed over this.
Yeah, exactly. But it's
I was switching sockets, going out to buy Sir Lancelot's greatest hits.
There you go. There you go. So check them out. There are a good chunk of them are available on Blu-ray. There's also a DVD set which has basically all of them too, if you don't really care about the high def thing. But all worth your time, all good. Spend 90 minutes or so of some pretty creepy and atmospheric horror from the 40s. And thanks for watching, everybody. Visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course. We're here on this thing called YouTube all the damn time. Thanks for watching. Have a very happy and healthy New Year's, everybody. But we'll be seeing you real soon here on the channel. For Dan Brown, I am Pete Pardo. Good night, everybody.
Happy New Year, guys.